Good morning and welcome back to the Tuesday, October 24th meeting of the Board of County Commissioners. We are in the midst of our budget hearings, critical needs hearings, and we are now on the coroner's office. Dr. Leon Kelly.
Thank you, County Commissioners, for allowing me to come speak today on our critical needs. And thanks to Nikki, she's not here now, and her team for helping assist put this together. So I am Dr. Leon Kelly, the El Paso County Coroner and Chief Medical Examiner. And so our strategic plan and goals for the next year or a couple of years are, service quality, right? The mission of our office is to figure out how and why people die. And the way that we do that is by essentially presenting an autopsy report and a completed death certificate at the completion of that work. And one of the main metrics then for identifying how we are doing is turnaround time on those reports. And so currently, at least last year, we've entered a period of great challenge, much like other offices, with increased volume, decreased staffing, and more complex cases. And so the 2022 mean, the average number of days of completion was 40.5. The goal over the next year is to get that down to 31 days. Average turnaround time. One of the main metrics we use for accreditation is how many cases take more than 60 days to complete. And the cutoff there is about 10%. And last year we were at 9.4%. So we're right up against that. So the goal would be to get that to less than 5% by the end of 2024. And to put that a little bit in perspective, even 40.5 days puts us probably in the top 5% nationally. Most offices around the country are looking oftentimes between 3 and 6 months to completion. And so while I'm not satisfied with that, certainly we are exceeding what the expectations are and are still in a very good place, but we can certainly do better. Secondly, technology infrastructure. Well, currently we have a 12-year-old Lodox. It's a low-dose X-ray scanner. It's a full-body scanner that we have had. We moved into the building with it in 2012. When we purchased that machine in 2012, it was actually a refurbished machine. I don't have any way to independently vet this, but we were told by the company that it had never been used, even though it was refurbished, because it was essentially a prop on the set of the television show Grey's Anatomy. And so I can't imagine the number of romances and betrayals the machine saw before it made it into our service. But it has done well. However, it is kind of entering the final phase of its life, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. More service quality, ensure retention of employees, and long-term sustainability of what is Colorado's busiest coroner's office through adequate staffing of both top priorities, medical examiners and death investigators, and further development of that mid-level leadership. We are essentially at a staffing state where if all goes well and nothing bad happens, we can survive. But unfortunately, we are literally in the business of bad things happening. And so when they inevitably do, it stresses our staff and our capabilities greatly. And so long story short, or to put another way, I need a deeper bench for the inevitabilities of the challenges that we have in our office. And then lastly, health and safety. It was good to see and kind of the tail end of Michael's presentation. And currently the work that he does is incredible, and it's an honor and a pleasure to work with him. And it's wonderful to play a part in ensuring the public health and safety of this community through partnerships and transparency and accountability. Essentially what we provide at the coroner's office is data and facts that allow him to prosecute, that allow public health to do the work that they need to do to help legislators and policymakers such as yourself make really, really good decisions. And so we have done that, and we will continue to do that, as well as partnerships within the county, but outside the county, such as academia and nonprofits and others. And we're super excited to play a role in the development of the county's data dashboard so that we can also have, our citizens can know exactly what we're doing and how those results are going. All right, so how do you know how the coroner's office is doing? I issue a coroner's annual report every year, and in there it includes caseloads, current staffing, trends, what performance indicators we are seeing, such as turnaround times. And here's the last, however many, 5 years When I took over, 2018 was Dr. Bucks's last year as coroner. I took over in 2019, and well, that was one of my big focuses, was to get that down. And so we got that from 32 days to 21 days average, got less than about 1% of our cases over the 60 days. Unfortunately, because much like every other industry in our post-pandemic era, with short staffing and supply line issues, this requires intensive and very advanced technological equipment, particularly on our toxicology lab, which is really the rate limiting step in turnaround time. As machines go down or struggle, it became difficult to get replacements, to get folks in there to get those machines fixed. And so we saw a creeping up of that, both the average as well as the percent over 60 days. The national standard, once again, is that 10%, so we've never breached that. But that is, once again, a priority. 2023 year to date, essentially up till maybe 2 months ago, that's about how much our cases are done. We've been able to get that down to about 27 days from the 40 of last year, so we're already seeing great progress there. And we're at about 3.5% of our cases over 60 days. So even though this is kind of our goal over the next year or two, we've already dramatically addressed it, largely by focusing on our tox department and coming up with some, when things go bad and go down, or when folks are out, we now have a plan B, an outside lab that we can use in consultation, which we had to use this year earlier for a few months as our supervisor was out on the best reason to be out for your job. And so we were able to sort of pivot there and keep things moving, which is great. Second, National Association of Medical Examiners laboratory accreditation. So we are every year inspected by an outside third-party agency to ensure competency, quality of the work, safety of the employees. And then every 4 years, we have a full in-person inspection. And so we have been accredited, the El Paso County Coroner's Office, since 1989. Our most recent inspection was just this September, so we just completed that over the summer. What I think is remarkable to folks is that in the entire United States of America, right, every city, county in this country has a coroner or medical examiner. Only 89 of those laboratories are accredited. Only 4 in the entire state of Colorado. By the National Association of Medical Examiners. And all 4 of those in Colorado are, not surprisingly, led, or the 4 offices that are led by medical examiners, okay? There's another accrediting body, the International Association of Coroners and Medical Examiners. In the entire US, they've accredited 36. So when you combine those 2, you're looking at 125. So only 125 coroner or medical examiner's offices in the entire country have accountability, transparency. Someone has come in and said, you are doing a good job. You are meeting the standards of practice in this country. And so it's incredibly unique and an incredible asset to have an office that is accredited. It also helps with recruitment of good quality people. I can tell you, me and my 4 medical examiners would not work at an office if it was not accredited by the National Association of Medical Examiners. And so when I go and testify on Michael's cases, when I go and I present at meetings, when I have to defend the work that we do against defense attorneys or others, I can say, you don't have to trust me, because another party came in of experts, of world-renowned experts came in and said we are doing what we're supposed to be doing here. All right, budgetary highlights. We bring in revenue, and the revenue sources come from several areas. First, the grant for violent death reporting. We have to upload the data from our fentanyl deaths or drug-related deaths, our suicides. And because we have the ability to do that work, the state gives us grant money for that. We perform autopsies for many out-of-counties, other counties across the state, which I'll show in the next slide. We bring in about $564,000 in 2022. For that work, we also have the state's only in-house forensic toxicology laboratory, so we do some work for other counties as well that's specific to toxicology. And then histology is the creation of the slides, which we have a histologist on our staff who can do that. And then that House Bill 21-1317 is reimbursement for the quantitative analysis of marijuana in folks under the age of 25. So when we do those tests, the state reimburses those because those are mandated, which we were doing before it was mandated, but we do get a little bit of money back for that work. So about $600,000 brought in from other places. The vast majority is on this slide here. Once again, because we are one of the few counties in the state with medical examiners on staff, non-forensic pathologist counties, when they have cases that require autopsy, must either bring those to a county that has medical examiners or hire consultants to come in and perform those autopsies. And so we cover essentially 22, 23 counties throughout Colorado, essentially a third of the state. We'll bring those bodies to us when cases need investigated. If those are criminal cases, our doctors will drive out to those counties to testify on those. And so we have essentially evolved from a traditional, sort of antiquated, archaic traditional coroner's office to essentially a regional medical examiner, covering once again about a third of Colorado. Our biggest contributors historically are Fremont County, Teller County, and Chaffee County, but we cover folks for a very, very far distance. So the breakdown, our budget, 3.7, and plus take the revenue out, it costs our taxpayers about $4.50 per person per year for that coroner's office. So critical need number one is a full-time medical examiner position. This is our trends over essentially a little more than the last decade. You can see in 2012, we did 967 autopsies total. The blue line is El Paso County. The orange line is our out-of-county, so you combine those together. And then over the last decade, we've increased that to 1,464. During that period, we have only increased our staffing by one, which was at the tail end of Dr. Bucks's time in 2018. And so we're going up a new medical examiner about every 250 to 300 cases needed, which I'll get to why that is in a second. For our accreditation, they have essentially pitch counts for medical examiners. How many cases are safe to do that are the recommended amount? And that is essentially 250 autopsies per medical examiner. And that's the average over your office. You take the total number of cases, you divide it by how many doctors you have, how many cases is that per doctor. If you exceed that 250, you essentially are told a strong recommendation to find a course correction of either do less cases or find more doctors. However, it's a recommendation. You still can maintain your accreditation. If you exceed 325 cases, however, you at that point risk losing accreditation. And so what we have is 1,464 total autopsies. Now the math gets a little tricky because 209 of that 1,464 were what we call external exams, meaning we just look at the outside of the body. We don't actually open it. Usually we know what's already on the inside. And so they take about half as much time to do as a full autopsy. And so mathematically, they only count 3 externals for one, as it equals basically one full autopsy. So when you take out the 209, divide by 3, you add it back in, we essentially did 325 complete autopsy equivalents. So that's the number that matters. If you take that and you divide it by our number of doctors, which is 5, it gets us 265 cases per medical examiner. So we've already exceeded the phase 1 violation. Now we're cheating a little bit because the recommendation is actually for your chief medical examiner and your deputy chief, because they have so many other responsibilities, it's really unrealistic to expect them to carry a full medical examiner's load. And so the chief is supposed to work essentially, supposed to count 50% of a full-time medical examiner. And the deputy chief is supposed to be 3/4. So if you do the math correctly, it gives us 4.25 full-time equivalent doctors, which puts us then at 312 cases per medical examiner. So theoretically, like me, I should be doing 150. Well, I've already done 230 this year. I should probably exceed 260, which puts me over the 250 case load already as someone who's supposed to be doing much less. And so we've exceeded by large margin really the phase 1 violation, and we are now approaching really the phase 2 violation if we're going to be completely transparent and honest about what we're doing. Which is why in our last inspection in September, it was recommended strongly that we increase our medical examiner staffing to ensure appropriate caseloads. So that's where all that math is coming from. Now to our medical legal death investigator. These are the folks that, question?
Commissioner Geithner.
Thank you. I do just have a question on the previous slide, and understanding that this is the requirement of the accreditation. So regardless of the answer to this, I understand the need here. But when you said that the safe number is 250, why is that considered the safe number? Is that about number of hours in a day? Like where does that number come from?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's partly historical. As they come in and they go through all your case files and they approve, double check everything that you're doing, it's been historically noted that once you exceed that 250, because the caseloads are so high, the likelihood of mistakes and errors starts to go up dramatically. Secondly, as those caseloads go up, that's more trials that you're going to. That's more additional workload that goes on top of it, more families that you're dealing with. And when you look at the average time it takes to do an autopsy, the time it takes to testify, the time it takes to talk to families, it starts to become unrealistic that someone can actually do that in a 40 to 50 to 60 hour work week. And so those two things kind of combined is why they put the pitch counts at those numbers. And then once you exceed that 325, then it's nearly impossible to carry that level of a caseload in a manner that's kind of defined as an appropriate workday.
Thank you for that explanation. As important as I know the accreditation is for all the reasons that you said, to put it into those words of how that really will impact the service to our community is really important. So thank you for that explanation.
Yeah. And the other piece of it is once you start to exceed that 325, that 350, it becomes next to impossible to hire a medical examiner, because the first question a medical examiner asks in a job interview is, how many cases am I going to do? Which is a reasonable question to ask. And so what happens is once you exceed that number, you'll either can't hire, or even more likely people will begin to leave, and it starts kind of a death spiral. You lose, you can't hire, and then you're left with places like Mississippi where one doctor's doing 1,000 cases and nobody will go there.
Dr. Kelly, I was going to hold this question for later, but you just brought it up. Can you tell us, back to that critical needs request number one, you've told us before how difficult it is to get qualified medical examiners and how few of them graduate in any given year. Can you tell us how long it will take to potentially fill this and what the cycle of timing and school looks like?
Yes. So one of the challenges is that I've talked about this before, but we maybe have between 500 and 750 full-time medical examiners in the U.S. at any given time. We probably need 1,000 to 1,200, and so your pool is very low. We only graduate about 25 to 35 forensic pathologists a year in the entire country. And so all of these offices are essentially fighting over that very, very small pool. In the state of Colorado, only Denver has a training program. And so we only graduate one in the entire state. Graduation of medical school is in June, then you do your fellowship. So it's essentially July 1 to June. And so you're fighting over these 25 to 30 people essentially at the midpoint of the summer. And so you start doing interviews generally around November, December for the following June, July, and then hopefully have people hired and ready to go by that point. I can tell you, having done this now for 15 years, that I compare it a lot to like Division I basketball recruiting. Like you got to meet them in middle school, and then you kind of keep catching up with them. How are you doing? How are you doing? So one of my staff, Dr. Murdoch, now I met him literally as a med student, now probably 8 years ago, and kept in touch. Then he went to Penrose for residency, and I kept in touch and mentored him, and then to fellowship. And so you got to start looking really, really, really early. And so there's never a guarantee. I know Denver had openings for several years before they were able to hire. Arapahoe County had openings for several years. Most offices in the country have openings that are almost perpetually open. We've been very fortunate here. 2 years ago, as you all remember, I was down 3 medical examiners and was able to, because of relationships and things, recruit, which is essentially a miracle, 3 at the same time. So we had 3 start what would now be almost 3 years ago. They're coming up. So you can't make it work, but it is a challenge for sure.
Thank you.
All right, so budget and critical needs. Need 2 full-time medical legal death investigators. And once again, these are the folks that literally go to the scene, talk to the families, investigate the death on site, and then bring those bodies back to the office and issue a report, essentially the eyes and ears of the medical examiner. And so over the last decade, we have gone from 3,600 total death investigated to 6,741 investigated. So nearly a doubling over the last 10 years. Both the autopsies and the death investigation increases are driven, at least the last 3 to 4 years, by fentanyl, increases in car crashes, and unfortunately increases in homicides. Those are the big contributors. And so during that entire time, in 2016 was the last time we asked for additional staffing. We went from 8 to 10. Since then, I've been able to, since I took over in 2018 or 2019, kind of move staffing around. We were able to phase out transcriptionists because now there's technology that can do those jobs. But this is also a difficult job to retain and to recruit. We have once again, a national shortage of folks who can do this work. We are currently down 2 death investigators. So we're at 8 of our 10. And these jobs are incredibly emotionally difficult. They're physically demanding as well, because you may be carrying 300-400-pound bodies out of second stories of buildings or homes or out of basements. And it's a job that a lot of young people think they want to do because they see it on TV and they listen to the podcast and it sounds awesome. And then they show up and they suddenly realize it's an incredibly difficult job. And so we don't often have trouble finding people to hire. We often have trouble getting those people to complete their 6-month kind of trial internship. That's really the issue there, either because of the emotional drain and strain of it or the physical demands of being able to actually move these bodies around. And so there's really no office that compares to us because of size and complexity of what we're doing. The closest is Denver. Dr. Crusoe is the chief there, and he does a wonderful job, and that's a great office. But they're really not even in the same ballpark as far as caseloads. We're on the left there. We investigated 6,741 total. Last year, they did 5,000, a little over 5,000. From autopsies, we did 1,464, and they did 970. From a staffing perspective, we're essentially identical on medical examiners. We're a little bit low on death investigators, a little bit low on morgue staff, lower on administrative staff. They have 2 data folks. They have a full-time epidemiologist. I'm essentially our data person. Me and one of my investigators work on it together. We do have 4 toxicologists because once again, we're the only folks that do that in their own building. All right, so critical need number 3, the Lodox X-ray scanner. Every case that is essentially trauma, so car crashes, homicides, suicides, are going to get X-rayed. All kids get X-rayed. Fires, decomposed bodies are going to get X-rayed head to toe. That's our scanner there on the right, and the left is what they look like when the scans come out. And so this is a busy, busy machine. We have had it limping along here for the last couple of years. The company it's a South African company. It was developed initially to scan the people working in the diamond mines as they were coming out, because it's low dose X-ray. You can get them every day and it doesn't harm you, and it's not harmful to the workers because the X-ray dose is so low. And then they obviously realized that this could be useful in a medical and forensic setting. And so you lay the body on there and it scans it from head to toe, and then we turn, that's anterior to posterior or front to back. We turn the machine 90 degrees and then it scans from side to side. So it allows us to localize bullets in bodies and go find them. It helps protect our staff from sharp objects. It allows us to identify medical, surgical hardware that's in the body that has serial numbers on it that then we can use to identify them. And then obviously broken bones in the normal sort of medical use. The week of Club Q, it worked. The following Monday, so 1 week later, we had, I think, a couple car crashes and a couple gunshot wound suicides that need scanned, and it broke. And so the company the North American branch is in California. So every time it breaks, we have to fly them in. It's part of a service contract, but it takes them several days to get there to fix it. So it can be down 3 to 4 days before it's up and running. So that day, we had to drive the bodies up to Arapahoe and use their scanner, which is doable. However, had that happened the week before of Club Q, it would have been disastrous. In the most recent Return to Nature funeral home disaster, I would love to have scanned every one of those bodies coming through the door. It can't do that much in a row. It overheats and shuts down. And so what I did was decided to scan only those who came out the other side after processing that we still didn't have names on. And so I could reduce that down from 189 to 50 or 60. So not ideal, but I made it work. We're just fortunate that it hasn't gone down at the worst moment. And so it is working right now. We can continue to support it, but knowing that at some point it's going to break when we can least afford it. And so it's something I'm trying to address as quickly as possible. It's medical equipment, and so it's expensive, and it is state-of-the-art. This is the company that we have used the last 12 years as Lodox. There's another company, its reputation isn't quite as good. We've been incredibly satisfied with not only the machine, but the service that we do get from the company, and it is essentially a plug and play. So there's no structural changes that need to happen with the building, which is why I've decided to go with that one. So how this affects us budget-wise, 3.7 is our current 2024 budget. I'm asking for critical needs of 671. 2 of those are ongoing, right? The medical examiner and the death investigator. And then the other one, the bigger one, is the Lodox full body X-ray scanner. So that's what I have.
Are there any questions or comments? Commissioner?
Yes, I want to thank you for all that you do. We've seen, as Commissioner Geithner said this morning, we have a community that's very much passionate about public safety. So from our sheriff, our police departments, to our district attorney, to our coroner, it all makes one good triangle to have all 3 working closely together. And I did mention earlier a friend who had died in actually Los Animas County, one of the counties that you're not contracted with. So you might be getting a call from there, but you just see that in the results of our outcomes in fighting for justice for these victims, the professionalism of your office coming through, being able to have you in court to testify, or one of your other coroners there to testify, really helps in these cases. And so I appreciate all you do, and thank you very much for helping out Fremont County on the Return to Nature funeral home. That was a very sad situation.
It is very sad. Thank you for those comments. It was very sad and exceptionally challenging last couple of weeks for us.
Commissioner Vanderwerf?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll express my appreciation as well, and I also acknowledge and appreciate the last few weeks that I have to imagine have been pretty tough. It does seem to me like perhaps legislation might be coming down from the state to work on that issue. You're probably involved in that one degree or another, so thank you for that as well. And I think you do a great amount of work. You and the team, the entire team, do a great amount of work with the resources you have. I appreciate that a lot, because that allows us, when we're dealing with budget challenges, to be able to say, hey, you know, we're at the edge here. We just can't just stand by now. We've got to do something about this. I did have one question that I wanted to ask. It's perhaps not a critical question per se, but in that accreditation process, if, you know, the coroner is actually authorized so many medical examiner seats, but then has trouble recruiting them, are you able to count the seats, or do you have to count the actual people when you get to the cases per person?
Yeah, essentially what they do is, as long as you are making an effort to resolve the issue, I mean, they understand the challenge that we have. So as long as there's a plan in place and there's effort moving in that direction, you will continue. You may have an approval, like a contingency, or because as long as you have that plan there, then usually they'll continue your accreditation with the knowledge that, hey, we're letting them go, and here's why: is because they're addressing it. They're attempting to address it.
Yeah, I appreciate that the accreditation agency would be willing to have that kind of flexibility, because if you've got this, if you've got the positions and you've got the funds and you can't find anybody to fill it, then you're stuck. And then you could be punished for that, you know, in some other way by losing the accreditation when you just couldn't even find a qualified person for the job. So I'm glad they've got some flexibility.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I appreciate the information. Really like the explanation on the ratio and how many workload per medical examiner. That was very useful, and you really detailed that in a way that was easy to understand and why that's important. And so I appreciate that. And again, also how this board is being very supportive, as we always are, of public safety, and this is just one aspect of that as well. Thank you.
Commissioner Geithner.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and great comments by everyone so far. Really great presentation, really appreciate that. I think oftentimes when we talk about public safety, probably not everyone thinks about the coroner's office, but it is very clear that what you do is incredibly important, especially in those partnerships with our DA's office and getting you know, justice for victims. And so I think that's incredibly important. I think that your explanation of why this is so necessary, not just for the, you know, we need the accreditation, but for, again, quality services to our community, which I know is important to all of us, was a great explanation. And I absolutely think this is an integral part of us continuing to support public safety. So thank you for bringing these forward, and seems like a really wise investment for our community.
And, you know, first of all, I'm somewhat shocked that we can get any type of imaging equipment, much less a full body x-ray scanner, for less than $500,000. So I think, but it just goes to show how much your office does with so very little. And I'm incredibly impressed. I think you've made the case, not just today and not just in this presentation, but over what we've seen you do for our community. And I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. I didn't get a chance to say it this year for your annual coroner's report, but this community is so fortunate to have someone like you leading the office, looking forward to what we're going to need in the future, how we can serve our rural county neighbors, how we can build a pipeline within an office, and how we can continue to have that standard of excellence in medical examination and forensic science really at the top in the nation. So I'm very grateful that you do that and find time to analyze the data and tell us what it means in other areas of public safety for our community. It's incredibly impressive what you have accomplished, and I am excited to see this request. I think it fits right in line with, as my colleagues have said, and with what you've heard in the previous two presentations, the prioritization of public safety. And then on to another note, thank you for the time that you and your staff, time and energy and emotional energy that you all spent with the recent caseload that you didn't expect to see in your office. And I have no doubt that the professionalism with which you were working with everybody from CBI to FBI, as well as many other regulatory type agencies, was second to none. I appreciate that. We're thankful and grateful for you, and I hope that your staff can perhaps see some relief in caseload at some point, but either way, just grateful that you're able to take care of them in the way that you do, because they have some of the hardest jobs in this community.
Yes, thank you. And the Return to Nature funeral home, you know, we did 189 autopsies in 7 days, which is essentially like 12.5% of our annual caseload. So we work 12-hour shifts, literally 7 straight days. I'm going to brag a little bit here, but I do not know, and this isn't a knock on anybody else's office, because there are great offices, but I think it speaks to the magnitude of the challenge, but I do not know that anybody else could have done that. because of the uniqueness of the staffing that we have, the facilities that we have, we had the opportunity to do something that was really impactful. But that can't happen. We could not have done it without the support of our Pikes Peak Office of Emergency Management, our facilities, the support of you all, not only here, but historically. And so I'm very proud of the effort that we did, but the ability to do that was a decade or more in the making from support of this board. So thank you all for that.